Billionaire arms dealer forced to marry his rival's daughter to avoid a bloody war. Hey there, I'm Alex, your guide through today's extraordinary tale on Hearts of Crime. What you're about to witness is a story of passion and danger that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Trust me, when I say the twist at the end will leave you absolutely speechless. If you enjoy these forbidden love stories, please hit that like button and drop a comment below sharing your thoughts. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our daily uploads of these incredible stories. Stay with me until the very end. I promise the conclusion will shock you in ways you can't imagine. So sit back, relax, and enjoy today's episode. Have a wonderful day, and may God bless you and your family. Blood trickled down Brock Armstrong's knuckles as he stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office. The Manhattan skyline glittered before him, a testament to wealth and power that normally brought him satisfaction. Not tonight. The cracked glass of the whiskey tumbler in his hand matched his fractured composure. "Give me one good reason why I shouldn't burn their entire operation to the ground," he growled, not bothering to turn toward the man seated behind him. Alistair, his silver-haired advisor, sighed heavily. "Because even you, with all your resources, cannot afford a war with the Daniels family, not now. Not with the federal investigation looming." Brock's jawline tightened beneath his perfectly trimmed beard. At 30-something, he'd built Armstrong International from the ashes of his father's failing munitions business into a global empire that officially specialized in defense contracting and unofficially controlled weapons distribution channels across 3 continents. His rivals knew him as ruthless, brilliant, and utterly without mercy. But the Daniels family had crossed a line when they intercepted his shipment in Dubai. "They've taken over $1 billion in assets," Brock said, finally turning. His penetrating blue eyes fixed on Alistair with predatory focus. His tall, athletic frame seemed to fill the room with barely contained fury. "And killed 15 of my men. And you eliminated 12 of theirs in retaliation," Alistair countered, unintimidated. "Richard Daniels is old school. He respects strength, but also values tradition. That's why he proposed a solution." Brock laughed bitterly. "A marriage, like we were living in medieval times." "An alliance," Alistair corrected, "with his daughter, Faith." The mention of her name sent an unwelcome jolt through Brock's body. He'd seen Faith Daniels exactly once, at a charity gala in Monaco last year. While her father worked the room with calculated charm, she had stood apart, observing everything with intelligent, assessing eyes. Unlike the typical trophy wives and girlfriends that adorned the arms of men in their world, Faith Daniels radiated a quiet confidence that had caught Brock's attention instantly. With her cascade of copper hair and emerald eyes, she was undeniably beautiful, but it was the sharp intelligence in those eyes that had lingered in his memory. That and the fact that she'd rebuffed his approach with a cutting remark about the blood on his company's ledgers. "And she despises me and everything I represent," Brock said flatly. "Yet she agreed to the arrangement," Alistair replied, sliding a folder across the desk. "Richard Daniels is losing his grip on the Eastern Territories. His enemies sense weakness. This alliance isn't just about ending your conflict, it's about consolidating power." Brock flipped open the folder, scanning the formal letter within. The terms were straightforward. Marriage between the heirs of both families, combining their assets and territories, presenting a united front that would deter any rivals considering an attack during their moment of vulnerability. "And what does Faith get out of this arrangement?" Brock asked, unable to imagine the fiery woman he'd encountered willingly agreeing to be traded like a commodity. "Protection for her family, legitimacy for their business interest through your political connections, and—" Alistair hesitated. "And what?" "Your assistance with her charitable foundation, the one rebuilding communities damaged by conflict." Brock's laugh held no humor. "So she wants to use my blood money to clean up blood spilled partly by her own family. Poetic." The wedding would take place within the month, small private, but with enough publicity to make the alliance clear to everyone in our circle. Brock turned back to the window, mind racing through alternatives, escape routes, ways to maintain dominance without capitulating to this archaic solution. He found none that wouldn't result in all-out war. Fine, he finally said. Set up a meeting. I want to hear from Faith herself that she's agreeing to this willingly. I don't need an unwilling bride who'll put a bullet in my head on our wedding night. Faith Daniels slammed the fencing foil into its stand with enough force to make her trainer wince. She yanked off her mask, revealing a face flushed with exertion and anger, her copper hair dampened with sweat but no less striking. Tell my father I'm not discussing this again, she said to the nervous assistant hovering at the edge of the training room. Ms. Daniels, he insists. I don't care what he insists, Faith snapped, striding toward the luxurious changing rooms of her family, Connecticut estate. I've already agreed to this barbaric arrangement. What more does he want? Mr. Armstrong has requested a meeting, the assistant blurted out, to discuss terms in person. Faith froze, her heart skipping traitorously. Damn him! She'd spent the past year trying to forget their brief encounter in Monaco, the intensity of his gaze, the unexpected intelligence beneath his ruthless reputation, and the unwelcome attraction she'd felt, despite knowing exactly who and what he was. When? She asked, her voice carefully controlled. Tonight, neutral ground, the private dining room at Le Bernardin. Faith closed her eyes briefly. Her father was losing control of the empire he built. His Parkinson's diagnosis, still a closely guarded secret, was progressing faster than the doctors had predicted. Without this alliance, rivals would circle like sharks, sensing weakness. The bloodshed would be catastrophic. Tell Mr. Armstrong I'll be there at 8, she said finally. And Melissa? The assistant looked up expectantly. Have the files on his government contracts sent to my room. If I'm selling myself to the devil, I want to know exactly what I'm getting in return. The private dining room at Le Bernardin felt more like a negotiation chamber than a romantic setting. Faith had arrived precisely at 8, dressed in an elegant emerald sheath that matched her eyes and highlighted her slender but curved figure. She had chosen the dress deliberately, professional enough for business, beautiful enough to remind Armstrong what he was getting in this bargain. Brock arrived at 8:05, a calculated move that Faith recognized immediately. In their world, making someone wait was a subtle power play. She spent those 5 minutes reviewing the terms of their arrangement in her mind, reinforcing her resolve. When he entered, the air in the room seemed to change. Faith had forgotten the sheer physical presence of the man, tall and broad-shouldered, in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that did nothing to hide his athletic build. His dark hair was shorter than she remembered, emphasizing the sharp angles of his absurdly handsome face. But it was his eyes that held her attention, ice blue and penetrating, currently assessing her with the same calculated intensity she was directing at him. Ms. Daniels, he said, his deep voice sending an unwelcome shiver down her spine. Mr. Armstrong, she replied coolly, remaining seated as he approached. Another small power play. He smiled slightly, recognizing the move, and took the seat opposite her without waiting for an invitation. A waiter appeared immediately with champagne, then discreetly vanished. I assume we re-celebrating our engagement, Faith said with a touch of sarcasm, nodding toward the champagne. I never agree to any arrangement without meeting my partner first, Brock replied, studying her face. I wanted to confirm you re-entering this arrangement of your own free will. Her Faith raised a perfectly arched eyebrow. How gallant. Are you concerned for my welfare or worried I might prove difficult to control? Both, perhaps. His honesty surprised her. This arrangement only works if we present a united front. Internal conflict would defeat the purpose. Faith took a measured sip of champagne, using the moment to collect her thoughts. Let me be clear, Mr. Armstrong. I'm agreeing to this arrangement for one reason only, to prevent a war that would cost countless lives. I harbor no romantic illusions about our future together. On that, we are in perfect agreement. Brock leaned forward slightly. But if we are to convince the world and our enemies that this union is real, we'll need to do better than barely concealed hostility. Faith met his gaze directly. What exactly are you proposing? A truce. We learn to work together, at least in public. We find common ground where possible. Such as my foundation? A muscle ticked in his jaw. Yes, I've reviewed your proposal. Your work in conflict zones is admirable. But at odds with your business model, Faith finished for him. Difficult to sell weapons to both sides when someone's rebuilding what you helped destroy. For an instant, something like genuine emotion flashed across his face. Anger, certainly, but something else too. Something that looked almost like guilt. Then it was gone, replaced by his usual controlled expression. We all have blood on our hands in this business, Ms. Daniels, your family included. Faith felt the truth of his words like a physical blow. Her father had built their empire through ruthless expansion, eliminating rivals and controlling territories with brutal efficiency. She'd spent years trying to balance that legacy with her own work, seeking some form of redemption. Then perhaps, she said quietly, this arrangement offers us both a chance to leave a different legacy. Something shifted in Brock's expression, a subtle change she couldn't quite interpret. He raised his glass slightly. To mutual benefit, he offered. Faith clinked her glass against his. To survival. They studied each other over the rims of their glasses, each recognizing the dangerous combination of attraction and mistrust that simmered between them. This would be no fairy tale romance, but a precarious alliance between two people trained from birth to trust no one. As the first course arrived, Faith silently acknowledged the truth she'd been avoiding since receiving her father's ultimatum. Her reaction to Brock Armstrong went far beyond professional respect or physical attraction. He represented everything she had fought against, and everything she secretly feared she was destined to become. And now, for better or worse, they were bound together by forces neither could control. The engagement announcement sent shockwaves through their world. Two rival dynasties, suddenly united through marriage. It was unprecedented. Speculation ran wild, from theories about forced alliances to romantic fantasies about star-crossed lovers. Faith and Brock let the rumors swirl. The confusion served their purposes, keeping enemies off balance and uncertain. The wedding took place at Brock's private estate on the coast of Maine, a fortress disguised as a luxury retreat. Security was impenetrable, with only the most trusted associates from both families in attendance. To the outside world, they released carefully selected photographs, the striking couple exchanging vows against a backdrop of ocean and sky, Faith resplendent in a gown that highlighted her slender curves and fiery hair, Brock imposing and handsome in a bespoke suit. His usually hard expression softened as he gazed at his bride. It was theater, meticulously staged, down to the tender kiss they shared before their small audience. What the photographs didn't show was the electricity that had shot through both of them at that momentary contact, an unwelcome reminder of the complicated attraction simmering beneath their business arrangement. That night, after their guests had departed, Faith stood on the balcony of the master suite, staring out at the moonlit ocean. She changed from her wedding gown into silk pajamas, a deliberate choice that was neither overtly seductive nor completely closed off. Their agreement hadn't specified the exact nature of their marriage, but she wasn't naive. Alliances in their world were cemented in multiple ways. When Brock joined her on the balcony, he'd also changed into more casual clothes, dark pants and a simple button-down with the sleeves rolled up, revealing muscular forearms. He handed her a glass of whiskey without asking if she wanted one. "Tradition dictates I carry you over the threshold," he said, a hint of irony in his voice. Faith took a sip of the amber liquid, appreciating the smooth burn. "I think we've fulfilled enough traditions for one day, don't you?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. More than enough. He leaned against the railing, his powerful frame silhouetted against the night sky. "We should discuss expectations." Faith turned to face him directly. "Regarding this," he gestured between them, "our living arrangements, the physical aspect of our marriage." Faith felt heat rise to her cheeks, but kept her expression neutral. "I assumed we maintain separate residencies when possible. As for the rest," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "I'm not opposed to making this a real marriage in all senses, but I want it to be treated as property or a conquest." Saw something flickered in Brock's eyes, surprise perhaps or respect. "I've never had to force or buy a woman's affections, Faith. I won to start with my wife." The word wife hung between them, strange and weighty. Then we proceed as we feel comfortable, Faith said. Partners in business and whatever else develops naturally. Brock studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. Agreed. He finished his whiskey and set the glass down. I'll take one of the guest rooms tonight. We've given the staff enough to gossip about already. As he turned to leave, Faith found herself saying, Brock. He paused, looking back at her with those penetrating blue eyes. Thank you for today, for making it dignified. Something softened in his expression. Get some rest, Faith. Tomorrow, we start the real work. So the real work, as it turned out, began with a series of joint appearances at key events, charity galas, business conferences, exclusive social gatherings where the elite of their world took measure of this new alliance. Faith observed Brock in these settings with growing fascination. He moved through the treacherous waters of their society with predatory grace, always alert, always calculating. Yet there were moments that surprised her. His genuine interest when discussing emerging technologies, his unexpected kindness towards staff at various venues, the flash of real emotion when certain topics arose. For his part, Brock found himself increasingly intrigued by his new wife. Faith was not merely the principled idealist he'd initially assumed. She was strategically brilliant, navigating complex social dynamics with effortless charm, while gathering information and forming alliances of her own. At a benefit in London, he watched her expertly extract crucial intelligence from the wife of a competitor, all while appearing to discuss nothing more significant than fashion trends. "You're more your father is daughter than you admit," he commented later in their hotel suite, loosening his tie as Faith kicked off her heels. "I am exactly my father is daughter," she countered, unpinning her hair and letting it cascade down her back. "That is why I understand the damage our businesses cause and why I am determined to balance the scales somehow." Brock poured them both a nightcap, a ritual they'd fallen into during their weeks of public appearances. Noble intentions, but this world doesn't reward nobility. Faith accepted the glass, her fingers brushing his. Perhaps that is why it is so broken. Their gazes held for a moment too long, the air between them charged with something neither was ready to acknowledge. Faith broke the contact first, moving to the window. "The meeting with the European distributors is tomorrow. We should review the proposal again." Brock allowed the deflection, though a part of him wanted to pursue the tension between them to its natural conclusion. Instead, he retrieved his tablet and sat beside her on the sofa, close enough that he could detect the subtle scent of her perfume as they reviewed business strategies into the early hours. When Faith eventually fell asleep against his shoulder, Brock remained still, watching her peaceful expression and wondering when exactly his reluctant bride had begun to feel less like an obligation and more like a partner he would choose, given the freedom to choose at all. 3 months into their marriage, the first real test of their alliance came in the form of a betrayal. One of Brock's most trusted lieutenants was discovered passing information to a rival organization, information that could have compromised not only Armstrong International, but also the Daniels family operations that were now intertwined with Brock AS. Faith was in Geneva, overseeing a project for her foundation, when she received the encrypted message from Brock: "Come home immediately, security breach, trust no one." She arrived at their New York penthouse 18 hours later to find Brock in his private office, surrounded by screens displaying security footage, financial data, and personnel files. He looked up when she entered, his expression grim, but his eyes showing momentary relief at her safe return. "Jeremy Ross," he said without preamble, "been with me for 7 years. Apparently the Kovacs organization made him an offer he couldn't refuse." Faith set down her bag, processing the implications. The Kovacs family controlled weapons trafficking throughout Eastern Europe and had been making aggressive moves to expand westward. What information did he access? Shipment routes, client lists, financial holdings. Brock's jaw tightened. "And your foundation, operational locations in conflict zones." Faith felt a chill run through her. The Foundation's humanitarian workers would be vulnerable if those locations fell into the wrong hands, people she was responsible for protecting. "Have you contained it?" she asked, her voice steady despite her rising fear. Partially. Ross is being held at the warehouse in Queens, but we haven't determined how much information has already been passed to Kovacs. Faith moved to the sidebar and poured 2 glasses of water, handing one to Brock. He accepted it with a nod of thanks, and she noticed the tension in his shoulders, the fatigue around his eyes. He'd been working non-stop since discovering the breach. "I need to question him," Brock said, setting the glass down untouched. "If Kovacs has the foundation locations—" "We go together," Faith interrupted. Brock frowned. "This isn't your area of expertise, Faith. Those are my people at risk," she countered, meeting his gaze steadily. "And Ross knows both of us. He may respond differently to me than to you." Something shifted in Brock's expression. Respect, perhaps, or concern. After a moment, he nodded. "We leave in 20 minutes. The warehouse was one of Armstrong International US black sites, a location that officially didn't exist, used for operations that couldn't withstand scrutiny. Faith had known about such places in theory, but had never visited one. The reality was both more mundane and more chilling than she'd imagined, a nondescript industrial building from the outside, a high-tech detention facility within. Jeremy Ross sat handcuffed to a metal chair in a sparse room, his once immaculate appearance now disheveled. He looked up as they entered, his expression shifting from defiance to surprise when he saw Faith. "I didn't expect the boss to bring his wife to an interrogation," he commented, a nervous edge beneath his attempted bravado. "Things really have changed." "The only thing that's changed is your allegiance, Jeremy," Brock replied coldly. "I want to know exactly what you told Kovacs about the Foundation operations." Ross's gaze flicked between them. "I don't know what you are talking about." Faith stepped forward, removing her coat and draping it over a nearby chair with deliberate calm. "Let me be clear, Mr. Ross. There are humanitarian workers, doctors, engineers, teachers, whose locations you may have compromised, people who are trying to rebuild what men like my husband and father have destroyed." She noted the surprise on Ross's face at her candor, and in her peripheral vision, a flicker of something unreadable in Brock's expression. "If anything happens to them," Faith continued, her voice soft but steel-edged, "I will hold you personally responsible. And while my husband has a certain reputation for handling betrayal, I promise you, my methods would be far more creative." The color drained from Ross's face. He expected Brock's rage had prepared for it. Faith's cold, precise threat was something he hadn't anticipated. "I didn't give them the Foundation locations," he finally said. "That information wasn't a part of the deal." "What was the deal exactly?" Brock asked, moving to stand beside Faith, their shoulders almost touching. Over the next hour, they extracted the full scope of the betrayal. Financial records, shipment routes, client information, damage that could be contained with effort. Faith observed Brock during the interrogation, noting the control he maintained despite his obvious fury. There was no physical violence, only the implied threat of it, which she realized was often more effective. When they had what they needed, Brock instructed his security team to hold Ross until arrangements could be made. As they left the room, Faith heard Ross call out desperately, "Armstrong, what are you going to do with me?" Brock paused in the doorway but didn't turn. "That depends on whether the information you've given us prevents any bloodshed." Then he guided Faith out with a light touch at the small of her back, a gesture that felt oddly protective. In the car returning to Manhattan, a heavy silence hung between them until Faith finally asked the question weighing on her mind. "Would you have tortured him if I hadn't been there?" Brock turned from the window to look at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "A few years ago, without hesitation. Now." He fell silent for a moment. "Our world is changing, Faith. Or perhaps I am." The simple admission, so at odds with his reputation as a ruthless arms dealer, stirred something in Faith that she'd been trying to ignore. The growing realization that Brock Armstrong was far more complex than the villain she'd initially believed him to be. "We should move the Foundation teams as a precaution," she said, returning to practical matters. "I can have new operational plans ready by morning." Brock nodded, then surprised her by reaching for her hand. His touch was warm, his grip firm but gentle. "I'm sorry your work has been compromised because of your connection to me." Faith looked down at their joined hands, then back to his face. In the passing streetlights, she caught glimpses of genuine regret in his expression. "We knew the risks of this alliance," she said quietly. "For both of us." He held her gaze for a long moment. "We did." Neither mentioned that this alliance, begun as a business arrangement, had evolved into something neither had anticipated, a partnership built on growing trust and reluctant admiration. That night, for the first time since their wedding, they shared a bed, not for passion but for comfort, lying side by side in the darkness as they discussed contingency plans for the foundation teams and security measures for their combined operations. At some point, Faith drifted to sleep mid-sentence, exhausted from travel and stress. She woke hours later to find herself curled against Brock's side, his arm wrapped protectively around her. For a moment, she remained still, listening to his steady breathing and feeling the solid warmth of him beside her. It would be easy to pull away, to maintain the careful distance they had established. Instead, she found herself settling closer, allowing herself this moment of vulnerability in the arms of a man who was quickly becoming far more than the reluctant husband she agreed to accept. The next weeks brought a flurry of activity as they worked to contain the damage from Ross's betrayal. Faith oversaw the relocation of foundation teams, while Brock restructured security protocols and feeding misinformation to the Kovacs organization through controlled channels. They worked seamlessly together, their complementary skills creating a formidable team. It was during this period that Faith began to see beyond Brock's carefully constructed facade. In quiet moments between crises, he shared fragments of his past, growing up in the shadow of his father's failing business, the desperate choices he made to save his family from ruin, the gradual hardening of his principles as he built an empire on the ashes of his father's mistakes. In turn, Faith revealed her own complicated relationship with her family legacy, her early rebellion against her father's business, her eventual realization that she could do more good with resources than without them, her constant struggle to balance pragmatism with principle. "We are not so different," Brock commented one evening as they shared a rare, quiet dinner on the penthouse terrace, both trying to build something meaningful from questionable foundations. Faith twirled her wineglass thoughtfully. "The difference is that I acknowledge the harm our businesses cause. You've spent your life justifying it." Instead of the anger she expected, Brock's expression turned reflective. "Perhaps, or perhaps I've simply been more honest about the world we live in. And what truth is that? That power is the only real currency. That someone will always sell weapons to those who want them, so it might as well be someone who exercises some control over where they end up." Faith leaned forward, challenging him. "And that justifies everything? The lives lost, the communities destroyed?" Brock met her gaze steadily. "Nothing justifies it, Faith. But denying reality doesn't change it. Your foundation rebuilds what weapons destroy. But without the profits from those weapons, would you have the resources to rebuild anything?" The question struck at the heart of the contradiction Faith had been wrestling with for years. She opened her mouth to deliver a practiced defense, then closed it again. For the first time, she allowed herself to truly consider his perspective, not to accept it, but to understand it. "There has to be a better way," she said finally. "For both of us." Something shifted in Brock's expression, a softening, an opening. Maybe that is what we were really building here, something better than what came before. The moment hung between them, weighted with possibility. Then Faith's phone buzzed with an alert, breaking the spell. She glanced at the screen, her expression immediately turning serious. "What is it?" Brock asked, instantly alert. "One of our foundation teams in northern Syria has gone dark. Last communication mentioned unusual military movement in the area." She looked up at him, fear and determination mingling in her eyes. "I need to find out what's happening." Brock was already on his feet, moving with purpose. "I'll contact our intelligence assets in the region. And Faith?" She looked up at him. "We'll find them. Together." In that moment, Faith realized that somewhere along the way, their forced alliance had become a true partnership. Whatever came next, they would face it not as reluctant spouses bound by a business arrangement, but as allies who had chosen each other despite every reason not to. And perhaps though neither was ready to name it, as something even more profound. The situation in Syria escalated quickly. Faith Yes Foundation team, 3 doctors and 2 engineers, had been establishing a medical clinic in a remote village when communications suddenly ceased. Satellite imagery showed unusual movement in the area. Unmarked military vehicles that didn't match the known patterns of local forces. "Kovac," Brock said grimly as they reviewed the intelligence in his secure command center. "This has their signature all over it." Faith paced the room, her usual composure fractured by concern for her team. Why target humanitarian workers? What could they possibly gain? "I swear it's not about the workers," Brock replied, his voice tight with controlled anger. "It is about us, about proving they can reach what we value." Faith stopped pacing, the truth of his words sinking in. "They were using my people to send us a message." Brock nodded, their eyes meeting in grim understanding. "The question is, how do we respond?" For the next 48 hours, they worked tirelessly, leveraging every resource at their disposal. Brock Yes intelligence network provided coordinates and facility layouts. Faith S regional contacts offered crucial information about local tribal alliances and terrain. Together, they constructed a rescue plan that balanced military precision with diplomatic finesse. "I'm going with the extraction team," Faith announced as they finalized preparations. Brock looked up sharply from the tactical display. "Absolutely not. They were my responsibility, Brock." "And you re mine," he countered, the intensity of his response surprising them both. A loaded silence fell between them before he continued more carefully. "You were not trained for this kind of operation. You'd be a liability to the team and yourself." Faith wanted to argue but recognized the logic in his words. Still, the idea of remaining behind while others risked their lives for her people felt wrong. "Then what am I supposed to do? Just wait here?" Brock approached her, close enough that she could see the fatigue etched around his eyes that now held something beyond professional concern. "We coordinate from here. Together. Every step." He hesitated, then added, "I need your insight. Your understanding of the region and the people there. We do this as partners." The word partners carried a weight that neither missed. Faith searched his face for a moment, then nodded. "Partners. So stati madu." The extraction operation unfolded with tense precision. From the command center, Faith and Brock monitored every aspect. The Team S approach through contested territory, the infiltration of the compound where the Foundation workers were being held, the tense moments of initial contact. "Team reports 5 hostages secured," the communications officer announced, "all alive, initiating exfiltration." Faith closed her eyes briefly in relief, feeling Brock's hand squeeze her shoulder, a gesture of support that had become increasingly natural between them. But their relief was short-lived. Halfway to the extraction point, the team encountered unexpected resistance. A heavily armed Kovac contingent that hadn't appeared in their intelligence briefings. "They re-pinned down," the tactical officer reported, his voice tense. "Request immediate air support." Brock turned to Faith, his expression grave. "We have a gunship on standby, but using it could have significant diplomatic repercussions." Faith understood immediately. An unmarked military aircraft conducting operations in sovereign airspace, the political fallout would be severe. It could compromise not just Armstrong International, but her Foundation's ability to work in the region for years to come. And yet, lives hung in the balance. Not just her Foundation team, but the extraction personnel who risked everything on her behalf. "Do it," she said firmly. "We all deal with the consequences." Brock held her gaze for a moment, then nodded to the tactical officer. "Deploy the gunship. Minimal collateral damage." The next 20 minutes were the longest of Faith S. life, as they tracked the operation through encrypted communications and thermal imaging. When the team finally reached the extraction point with all hostages secure, she found herself trembling with relief. "They coming home," Brock said quietly, standing close beside her. Without thinking, Faith turned and embraced him, her face pressed against his chest. After a moment of surprise, his arms closed around her, holding her with unexpected tenderness. Thank you, she whispered against the solid warmth of him. His hand moved to stroke her hair gently. So you don't need to thank me for this, Faith. Ever. She pulled back slightly to look up at him, suddenly aware of how natural it felt to be in his arms. His expression was unguarded, in a way she'd rarely seen, revealing a depth of emotion that mirrored her own confusion and longing. The moment was interrupted by the communications officer, clearing his throat discreetly. "Mr. Armstrong, we have incoming from the State Department. They were requesting an explanation for unauthorized military activity in the region." Reality intruded, and they separated, though something had irrevocably shifted between them. As they turned back to the crisis at hand, Brock's hand lingered at the small of her back, a silent promise that the conversation wasn't over, merely postponed. The political fallout from the rescue operation was severe, but manageable. Brock's connections in Washington helped contain the diplomatic incident, while Faith's Foundation publicly distanced itself from the military action, emphasizing the humanitarian nature of their work. The rescued team members, after receiving medical attention, provided crucial information. The Kovacs organization had used their kidnapping not just as a message to Armstrong and Daniels, but as leverage to secure a weapons route through territory previously controlled by Brock's operation. They were making a major play for expansion, Brock explained as they reviewed the intelligence in their penthouse. This was just the opening move. Faith studied the maps and reports spread across the table. "We need to contain this without starting an all-out war." Brock looked up at her, a hint of surprise in his expression. "Not so long ago, you would have suggested we simply withdraw from these regions entirely." Faith met his gaze steadily. "Not so long ago, I didn't understand the full picture. If we create a power vacuum, someone worse will fill it. Someone who might not care about civilian casualties or humanitarian concerns at all." A smile touched the corner of Brock's mouth. "You've changed." "We both have," she replied quietly. The acknowledgement hung between them, both understanding that their forced marriage had evolved into something neither had anticipated, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and increasingly something deeper. That night, after finalizing their strategy to counter Kovac, moves without escalating to open conflict, they found themselves lingering over a late dinner, reluctant to end their time together despite their exhaustion. "Your father called today," Brock said, refilling their wine glasses. "He wants to meet next week to discuss the Eastern Territories." Faith nodded, her expression turning pensive. "His condition is worsening. The doctors say he likely has less than a year." Brock reached across the table to take her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "I'm sorry, Faith." She looked up, surprised by the genuine sympathy in his eyes. "He is not an easy man to love, but he is still my father." "And a formidable businessman," Brock added. "He created an empire from nothing." "An empire built on suffering," Faith said softly. "As was mine," Brock acknowledged. "But perhaps that's not how our story has to end." Faith studied him in the soft lighting, seeing beyond the ruthless businessman to the man he was becoming, or perhaps had always been beneath the armor he'd debuilt around himself. "What are you suggesting?" "A new direction for both our companies. Less focus on arms, more on security infrastructure, technology, rebuilding efforts." His thumb traced patterns on her palm as he spoke. "It wouldn't happen overnight, but we could begin the transition. Create something we are both proud to leave behind." Faith felt her heart quicken at his words. "You'd do that? Change the fundamental nature of your business?" "Our business," he corrected. "And yes, for the right reasons." His eyes held hers, leaving no doubt about who those reasons included. Faith stood, still holding his hand, and moved around the table until she stood before him. "When exactly did this arrangement of ours become real, Brock Armstrong?" He rose to face her, their bodies close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I think it always was. We just weren't ready to admit it." This time, when their lips met, there was no audience to perform for, no strategic advantage to gain. There was only the truth they'd both been circling for months, that what had begun as a forced alliance had become a choice they would make again and again. The transformation of their business empires began gradually, strategic acquisitions in security technology, divestment from certain weapons manufacturing divisions, increased investment in infrastructure development in post-conflict zones. Faith's foundation became the humanitarian face of their combined operations, while Brock's business acumen ensured their continued profitability and influence. It wasn't tea without challenges. Old allies questioned the new direction. Rivals sensed opportunity in what they perceived as weakness. The Kovacs organization, in particular, made several aggressive moves to fill the space they believed Armstrong and Daniels were abandoning. The confrontation came to a head 6 months after the rescue operation, when intelligence revealed a Kovacs plot to assassinate both Brock and Faith at a security conference in Geneva, a desperate attempt to destabilize their operations and seize control of key territories. "We could cancel the appearance," Faith suggested, as they reviewed the threat assessment in Brock's office. "Attend virtually instead." Brock shook his head, his expression resolute. "That's exactly what they want, to drive us into hiding, to make us appear weak. We need to face this directly." "By walking into a trap," Faith challenged, "by springing it on our terms." Brock pulled up detailed schematics of the conference venue. "We use their plan against them. Let them think they re-control, then turn the tables." Faith studied the plans, her strategic mind already identifying potential angles. "It's risky." "So was marrying me," Brock replied with a hint of a smile. "That seems to be working out." Faith couldn't help but return his smile, despite the gravity of the situation. Their relationship had deepened in ways neither could have imagined, becoming a source of strength rather than the vulnerability their enemies perceived it to be. "All right," she agreed, "but we do this together." The Geneva conference proceeded under heightened security, though nothing obvious enough to alert their would-be assassins. Faith delivered a keynote address on post-conflict reconstruction, while Brock participated in a panel on emerging security technologies. To all appearances, they were focused entirely on business, unaware of the threat converging around them. Behind the scenes, however, a carefully orchestrated counter-operation was underway. Using intelligence gathered from both Armstrong and Daniels' networks, they had identified the Kovacs assets within the conference security team and hotel staff. Each was quietly neutralized and replaced with their own people. When the attack came, during a private reception overlooking Lake Geneva, Brock and Faith were prepared. As armed men burst through service entrances, they were met with immediate resistance from disguised security personnel. In the controlled chaos that followed, Faith and Brock were escorted to a secure location, from which they monitored the operation's conclusion. "Kovac himself is on site," their security chief reported. "He is attempting to flee through the North Service corridor." Brock and Faith exchanged a look of surprised recognition. Anton Kovac rarely left his compound in the Carpathian Mountains, preferring to direct operations from a distance. His presence here indicated how personally he had taken their challenge to his expansion. "Alive, if possible," Brock instructed. "He's more valuable as a negotiating tool than a martyr." Within minutes, they received confirmation. Anton Kovac had been captured, along with digital evidence linking him directly to not only the assassination attempt, but numerous illegal weapons shipments and territorial incursions. "What now?" Faith asked as they reviewed the secured evidence. "Hand him over to international authorities?" Brock considered for a moment. "That would be the expected move, but I think we have a better option." The meeting took place in a secured suite at the hotel, just hours after the failed assassination attempt. Anton Kovac, a barrel-chested man with cold eyes and a fighter's scarred face, sat across from Brock and Faith, flanked by security but unrestrained, a calculated show of respect from one power to another. "You could have killed me," Kovac observed, his accent thick but his English precise. "Why didn't you?" "Death is final," Brock replied simply. "And it leaves no room for evolution." Kovac laughed, a harsh sound. "You think I will evolve in prison? Because that is where I am headed if you turn over your evidence." "Not necessarily," Faith interjected, her voice calm but authoritative. "We keep reoffering an alternative." Over the next hour, they presented their proposal. Kovac would retain control of his organization, but redirect its focus away from weapons trafficking and toward legitimate security operations, following the model that Armstrong and Daniels had begun to implement. In exchange, they would withhold the evidence against him and provide technical and financial support for the transition. "Why would I agree to this?" Kovacs demanded. "First, why would you trust me to honor such an arrangement?" "Because the alternative is worse for everyone," Brock said flatly. "A power vacuum in your territories would lead to chaos, with smaller, less controlled groups fighting for dominance. More civilian casualties, more instability." "And we wouldn't trust you," Faith added. "We would verify, continuously and thoroughly." Kovacs studied them both, his expression calculating. "You two are not what I expected," he said finally. "The rumors about your marriage, that it was merely a business arrangement, I believed them." Faith felt Brock's hand find hers beneath the table, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "The rumors were true ones," she said. "At first." Kovacs nodded slowly, seeming to reach a decision. "I will consider your proposal, but I want my son included in all negotiations. He will inherit this business someday. He should understand its new direction." It was a significant concession, an acknowledgement that he was at least entertaining their offer. As Kovacs was escorted out to consider the terms, Faith turned to Brock, a question in her eyes. "Do you think he'll agree?" Brock's expression was thoughtful. "I think he recognizes something we took too long to see ourselves, that adaptation is sometimes the most powerful move, and that the right partner changes everything." In the months that followed, their vision took shape with remarkable speed. Anton Kovacs, after initial resistance, embraced the transformation of his organization with the same ruthless efficiency he'd once applied to expanding it. His son, a business school graduate with less appetite for violence than his father, became a key ally in implementing the changes. Richard Daniels lived just long enough to see the beginning of this new era. On his deathbed, he took Faith's hand and then, surprisingly, Brock's as well. "I arranged this marriage to save our family," he confessed, his voice weakened by illness, but his mind still sharp. "I never imagined it would save our souls as well." After his passing, Faith and Brock accelerated their plans, using the combined resources of both family empires to create something unprecedented, a global organization focused on security infrastructure, conflict prevention, and post-war reconstruction. The weapons manufacturing divisions weren't eliminated entirely. The world still needed defensive capabilities, but they were dramatically reduced and subjected to far stricter ethical guidelines. Their personal transformation mirrored their professional one. The carefully maintained boundaries of their early marriage dissolved as genuine love took root and flourished. Their relationship became the foundation upon which everything else was built, a partnership in the truest sense, balanced and strengthening. On their first anniversary, celebrated quietly at the main estate where they exchanged their vows, Brock presented Faith with a small, carved wooden box. "What is this?" she asked, taking it curiously. "Open it and see." Inside was not jewelry, as she half expected, but a key. "It's symbolic, really," Brock explained as she looked up questioningly. "It's the key to the first school built entirely by our new joint venture, in a village that once manufactured landmines for my company." Faith felt tears spring to her eyes as she recognized the profound meaning of the gift. "You remembered. It was the first village your foundation tried to help, but could not due to ongoing conflict." "Of course I remembered." His expression softened as he took her hands in his. "It matters to you, so it matters to me." Faith set the box aside carefully and moved into his embrace. "When did you become this man?" she asked softly. Brock's arms tightened around her. "When you showed me it was possible. When you believed I could be more than what the world made me." Later that evening, as they walked along the moonlit shore, Faith reflected on the strange journey that had brought them here. What had begun as a calculated business arrangement, a reluctant sacrifice to prevent bloodshed, had transformed into the most genuine relationship of her life. "Any regrets?" Brock asked, seeming to read her thoughts as they often did these days. Faith shook her head, leaning into his side as they walked. "Only that we wasted so much time fighting what was happening between us." "Not wasted," he corrected gently. "We needed that time. to learn to trust, to understand each other, to choose this life together, rather than simply accepting it as our fate. Faith stopped and turned to face him, framed by the vast ocean behind them. This man, who had once represented everything she opposed, had become her strongest ally in creating the change she always fought for. And somewhere along the way, he'd also become the love she'd never expected to find. "So what is next for the great Armstrong-Daniels alliance?" she asked with a hint of playfulness. "We have already rewritten the rules for an entire industry. What more is there to conquer?" Brock smiled, brushing a strand of copper hair from her face with gentle fingers. "I was thinking something a bit more personal this time." "Oh?" Faith raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Day family," he said simply. "Our family, if you want that too." The word hung between them, filled with promise and possibility. Faith thought of the legacy they were building together, not just of business empires redirected toward healing rather than harm, but of the love they'd found despite every obstacle. "I do want that," she answered softly. "Very much." As his lips met hers, Faith reflected that their story had begun with a price, a marriage arranged to purchase peace between rival dynasties. But what had started as transaction had become transformation. The true price of peace, they discovered, wasn't paid in concessions or compromises, but in courage, the courage to change, to trust, to love. It was a price worth paying, 1,000 times over. And as the stars wheeled overhead, and the ocean whispered its timeless rhythms against the shore, Brock and Faith Armstrong-Daniels stood together, no longer reluctant allies but willing partners in every sense, ready to write the next chapter of their unexpected love story. Wow, I told you that ending would be unexpected. If you enjoyed this story, please give this video a thumbs up and share your reactions in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to Hearts of Crime for more captivating stories, just like this one every single day. Click on the video appearing on your screen right now for another incredible tale of love in the criminal underworld. Thank you for watching until the end. May God bless you and your family, and I'll see you in the next video.